She heard the laugh and her hands stopped moving. Not a loud laugh. The other kind, the kind exchanged between two people who've decided the third person in the room doesn't count as an audience. The branch manager had turned to his colleague for 2 seconds. Said something. The colleague had smiled. That was it. Rachel Kim had walked into harder rooms than this. She'd sat across from investors who'd told her the market wasn't ready. She'd rebuilt her company twice. She'd raised her son alone since he was 4. She'd done all of it without her hands stopping. They stopped now. She was sitting in a branch of Meridian Bank on Devon Avenue at 10:47 in the morning with a loan application for $8,000 and a jacket she'd bought in 2009 and a recording app running in her bag. And she could not make herself look up from the form in front of her. She knew what the laugh meant. She'd built a company to fix what the laugh meant. She'd read 300 academic papers on lending discrimination. She'd interviewed 400 women who'd sat in chairs like this one. She'd built an algorithm specifically designed to remove what that laugh represented from the lending process. None of it had prepared her for how it felt to be the one in the chair. The manager turned back. Mrs. Kim, unfortunately, your income documentation doesn't meet our minimum threshold. She said thank you. She picked up her bag. She walked out. In the elevator, she looked at her reflection in the steel doors. In her wallet, a photograph of her mother outside a nail salon in 1998. The year Soon Yi Kim was turned down for a small business loan for the 3rd time. She'd gone back a 4th time. Rachel had built Lumina so no one had to. She looked at her hands. They were steady now. They just needed a moment. Rachel had asked herself the question on the drive over. Not should I do this? She'd decided that 2 weeks ago in a conference room on the 32nd floor of a building downtown when Sandra Lee had leaned back in her chair and said, Rachel, I've read your data. I believe your data. But I need to know if you believe it in your body, not just your head, because your customers do. Sandra had been investing in fintech for 22 years. She didn't ask questions she didn't mean. Rachel had driven home that night and sat at the kitchen table after Jason was asleep and thought about what Sandra meant. She knew what she meant. She'd been avoiding knowing what she meant for 3 years, because knowing what she meant required doing something she'd been telling herself wasn't necessary. It was necessary. The question she'd asked herself on the drive over was different. What am I afraid of? Not a rhetorical question. A real one, asked the way she asked all real questions. Directly, without softening, expecting an honest answer. She was afraid of feeling what her customers felt, not because she didn't want to understand it, because she already understood it more than she'd admitted. She'd been 14 when her mother sat across from a loan officer for the first time. Soon Yi Kim had saved for 3 years to open a nail salon. She had a business plan written in Korean and translated into English by Rachel's English teacher, who had stayed after school for 2 weeks to help because she'd understood that the translation mattered. She had a location. She had equipment quotes. She had everything the checklist said she needed. The loan officer had looked at the business plan. He'd looked at Soon Yi. He'd said the income history wasn't sufficient. Rachel had been in the waiting room. She hadn't heard the conversation. She'd seen her mother's face when she came out. She hadn't needed to hear the conversation. Soon Yi had gone back 3 more times over the following 2 years. Different banks. Same result, different language. On the 4th attempt, a community development financial institution on the north side that a woman from their church had mentioned, she'd gotten the loan. $15,000, $1,000. She'd opened the salon in 1999. It was still open. Rachel had started Lumina in 2018 because she'd done the math on what those 3 rejections had cost her mother. Not in money, in time. 2 years of saving, while the salon she could have opened wasn't open. 2 years of customers she could have had, she didn't have. 2 years of building something she was qualified to build, that the system had decided she wasn't qualified to build. She'd built an algorithm that removed the variables that weren't actually predictive of repayment, variables that correlate with race and gender and zip code, and the way someone's business plan was formatted. and replaced them with variables that were actual repayment behavior, cash flow patterns, network effects in specific industries. The algorithm worked. The data showed it worked. Sandra's question was whether Rachel understood why it needed to work, not as a CEO, as a person who had sat in a waiting room at 14 and watched her mother's face. Rachel understood. She just never sat in the chair herself. She'd worn the 2009 jacket deliberately. Not to costume herself, she wasn't performing poverty. She was removing the signals she usually carried that communicated this person has resources. Before she said a word, the jacket was good. It was worn. It was the jacket of someone who took care of things and hadn't replaced them yet. She'd looked at herself in the mirror before she left, not to check how she looked, to see what they would see. A Korean-American woman in her mid-40s, jacket from a decade ago. Hair pulled back, not styled, pulled back, the way you pulled it back when you had somewhere to be and not much time. No jewelry except the small gold studs she'd worn every day since Jason gave them to her for her 40th. She'd thought about taking them out. She'd left them in. Her mother had never taken off her wedding ring for a loan application, and Rachel was not going to perform a version of herself that was more stripped down than Soon Yi Kim had been willing to perform. She'd put the recording app on before she got out of the car, not to build a legal case, to build data, to have something she could analyze afterward that wasn't filtered through the adrenaline of the moment. She'd put the notebook in her bag. 3 questions she planned to ask about the loan product. Questions a real customer would ask. Questions she'd heard in 400 interviews. She'd looked at the photograph of her mother in her wallet. Soon Yi Kim outside the salon on Devon Avenue, 1998, the year before it opened. Standing in front of the space that wasn't a salon yet, a vacant storefront, newspaper over the windows, with the expression of someone looking at something only they could see. Rachel had carried that photograph for 15 years. She put the wallet in her bag. She went in. The first bank had been on Clark Street. She'd gone there first because it was the largest, the kind of institution that processed thousands of applications a week, that had the most standardized process, that would give her the cleanest read on what the baseline experience looked like. The loan officer had been professional. He'd been thorough. He'd explained the products clearly, asked appropriate questions about her income and credit history, reviewed the documentation she'd brought with the focused attention of someone doing their job correctly. He'd told her the income documentation didn't meet the threshold for the product she'd asked about, but that she might qualify for a different product with a lower limit. He'd given her a brochure. He'd thanked her for coming in. She'd thanked him. She'd walked out. On the sidewalk, she'd taken out the notebook. She'd written, process clean, communication clear, outcome declined, emotional register neutral, customer experience adequate. Then she'd written one more line. Adequate is not the same as dignified. She'd looked at that line for a moment. Then she'd gotten back in the car. Meridian Bank on Devon Avenue was the second stop. She'd chosen it specifically, Devon Avenue, the neighborhood where her mother Suller Son was, where Soon Yi Kim had walked past this branch for 23 years on her way to open the shop that this branch had not helped her open. She'd parked 2 blocks away. She'd sat in the car for 4 minutes. She'd thought about Sandra's question. Do you believe it in your body, not just your head? She'd gotten out of the car. She'd gone in. The branch manager's name was on a placard on his desk. David Cho. She'd sat down across from him. She'd put her documentation on the desk. She'd begun. He had good posture. That was the first thing Rachel noticed. Not his face, not his desk, not the nameplate, his posture. The specific, practiced uprightness of someone who had learned that how you held yourself in a room communicated something before you opened your mouth. She knew that posture. She used it herself, Miss Kim, he said. What brings you in today? The question was warm. The kind of warm that came from training rather than instinct. Not false exactly, but calibrated. She'd heard it in 400 interviews. The specific register of a professional performing accessibility. She told him what she'd told the first bank. Small business loan. Adelson dollars. She did nails, had a chair at a salon on Lawrence, was looking to rent her own space, had been doing it for 6 years, had a regular client base, had savings, had a credit score of 694. She put the documentation on the desk. He looked at it. She watched him look at it, not at what he was reading, at how he was reading, the pace of it, where his eyes stopped, what he went back to. She designed Lumina's intake process after studying exactly this moment, the first 30 seconds of a loan officer looking at an application. She'd tracked eye movement in research studies. She knew which variables got looked at first, which got looked at longest, which got noted, and which got passed over. She watched David Cho look at her documentation. She saw the moment his eyes stopped. Not at the credit score, not at the income figure, at the address, Pilsen. He looked at the address for 1 second longer than anything else on the page. She noted that. Then he looked up and looked at her, not unprofessionally, not obviously. The practiced look of someone who had learned to read people quickly and had been told this was a skill rather than a bias. She sat very still. "And you've been at this location, the salon on Lawrence, for how long?" he said. "6 years," she said. "Full-time?" "Part-time," she said. "I have a son. I work the hours that work for both of us." He nodded. The nod of someone filing information. She watched him file it. "And the space you're looking to rent," he said. "Do you have a lease in place?" "I'm in negotiations," she said. "The loan is contingent on the lease. The lease is contingent on the loan." "The classic chicken and egg," he said. He said it lightly, not unkindly. She smiled because smiling was what you did. He turned to his screen. He typed something. She looked at the desk while he typed. Clean. Organized with the specific precision of someone who controlled their environment carefully. A small framed photograph facing away from her, family, she assumed. The back of a frame was its own kind of information. A coffee mug that said Meridian Bank, excellence in service, in the font of something that had been given rather than chosen. She thought about her mother's salon, about Soon-Yi Kim arranging her station every morning, the specific, careful arrangement of someone who understood that the space communicated something to the client before the service began. She thought about what this space communicated. Then David Cho turned to his colleague. 1 second. Maybe 2. Something said quietly. She caught the shape of it, but not the words. The way you caught the shape of something through frosted glass. The colleague, a woman, younger, name tag. Grace smiled. Not at Rachel, at whatever David had said. Rachel heard the sound of the smile. She did not hear the words. Her hands stopped moving. She hadn't realized her hands had been moving. The small, continuous motion of someone who was present and engaged and performing presence and engagement. Taking notes, turning pages. The specific, ambient movement of a person at a meeting. They stopped. She looked at the form in front of her. She knew what she should do. She should look up. She should say, "I noticed that." "Can you tell me what was said?" She'd coached 400 women to do exactly that, to name what was happening in the room, to refuse to pretend it wasn't happening. She could not make herself look up. Not because she was afraid of the answer, because looking up meant acknowledging that she was the person in the chair in a way that she hadn't fully acknowledged yet, that the woman who built the algorithm and wrote the papers and interviewed the 400 women was also, right now, the woman in the chair. She'd known this intellectually. She was knowing it in a different way now. David turned back. "Mrs. Kim, I've had a chance to look at your documentation." His voice was the same as before, warm, calibrated, professional. "Unfortunately, with part-time income and no executed lease agreement, we're not able to approve this particular product. The debt-to-income ratio doesn't meet our threshold." She looked up. "What would meet the threshold?" she said. He told her. Specifically, clearly, without condescension. Full-time income documentation or an executed lease or a cosigner with established credit history. All reasonable. All things her mother hadn't had in 1996. "Is there another product that might work?" she said. He looked at the screen. He told her about 2 other products, lower limits, higher rates, the specific mathematics of options designed for people who didn't meet the primary threshold. She asked two of the three questions from her notebook. He answered them correctly. He was professional throughout. He stood when she stood. He shook her hand. He told her she could come back when she had the executed lease. She thanked him. She walked out. In the elevator, she looked at her reflection. She looked at her hands. They were still. In her bag, the recording app was still running. She turned it off in the lobby. She walked to the car. She got in. She sat. She didn't open the notebook immediately. She looked at Devon Avenue through the windshield. The street her mother had walked for 23 years. The shops. The people. The specific, continuous life of a neighborhood that existed whether or not the financial system acknowledged it. She thought about Grace's smile, about the shape of something said through frosted glass, about her hands stopping. She thought about the 400 women she'd interviewed. How many of them had said, "I don't know what happened exactly. Something just shifted, and then I couldn't make myself finish the application." She'd coded that response as environmental friction. She understood now what it actually was. The cost of being in a room where you could feel, not prove, feel that you were being assessed on something that had nothing to do with whether you could repay a loan. And the specific, exhausting calculation of whether the thing you felt was real or whether you were wrong, and you were making it about something it wasn't about, and what it cost to sit with that uncertainty and keep going anyway. She opened the notebook. She wrote. Subject froze. Could not maintain eye contact after incident. Could not complete planned questions. Reason, not financial, not procedural. Emotional cost of continued presence in the room exceeded available resources. She looked at what she'd written. She thought about 400 women. About how many of them had written nothing because there was no notebook, no recording app, no framework for turning what had just happened into data that could change something. They'd just driven home, or taken the bus, or walked, carrying what they were carrying with no way to put it down. She closed the notebook. She called her mother. Soon Yi picked up on the second ring. Rachel, you okay? She hadn't planned to call. Her hands had dialed before she decided to. Yes, she said. I wanted to hear your voice. A pause. You went to the bank, Soon Yi said. Rachel looked at the windshield. How did you know? She said. Because you only call me in the middle of the day when something happened that you need to think about, her mother said. And you sound like you're thinking. Rachel looked at Devon Avenue, at the salon 2 blocks north, at the street her mother had walked for 23 years. It happened, Rachel said. The thing I built the company to stop, it happened to me. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. I thought it might. You thought, I thought when you were ready to sit in the chair you would understand something you couldn't understand before, Soon Yi said. Not about them, about yourself. Rachel looked at her hands. What did you understand? Rachel said, the first time, when you came out and I was in the waiting room. Soon Yi was quiet. That the fourth time was going to be harder than the first, she said. Not easier. Because the first time you don't know what you're walking into. By the fourth time you know exactly what you're walking into, and you have to decide if you're going to walk in anyway. Rachel looked at the notebook in her lap. At emotional cost of continued presence in the room exceeded available resources. How did you decide? Rachel said. I thought about the salon, Soon Yi said. Not as a business, as a place. A place where women came and sat down and someone took care of them for an hour. I thought about how much that place needed to exist. She paused. And I decided the cost of walking in was less than the cost of the place not existing. Rachel sat in the car on Devon Avenue for a long time after she hung up. She looked at the street. She thought about 400 women who hadn't had the salon to think about, who had just had the loan, and the room, and the cost. She opened the notebook again. She added one line. The algorithm removes the bias. It doesn't remove the room. We need to fix the room. She put the notebook in her bag. She started the car. She had work to do. There is a specific kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. Rachel knew it by the time she got to the parking garage. Not physical tired, she'd been awake since 5:30, had driven 40 minutes, had sat through 2 loan applications in 2 hours. That was manageable. That was the kind of tired that coffee fixed. This was the other kind. The kind that came from spending 2 hours being assessed. Not evaluated, assessed. The difference was in the direction of it. Evaluation looked at what you brought. Assessment looked at what you were. And what you were, in both of those rooms, had been decided somewhere between the moment you walked in and the moment you sat down. She'd known this. She'd built 3 years of research on this. She was knowing it now in a way that research didn't prepare you for, in the body, in the specific exhaustion of a person who has been performing competence in a room that had already made up its mind. She sat in the car on the 3rd floor of the parking garage and didn't move for 6 minutes. Not processing, resting. The specific, necessary rest of someone who had spent 2 hours being more than they were allowed to feel like being. She thought about her customers, not as a category, as specific women she'd interviewed over 3 years. Priya, 38, who had driven 45 minutes to a branch in a different neighborhood because she'd heard the loan officers there were more receptive, had not used the word fair, had used the word receptive, the careful language of someone who had learned to ask for less than what she deserved, because asking for exactly what she deserved had a cost she'd already calculated. Danielle, 44, who had brought her sister to her loan application as a witness, not a co-signer, a witness, because she'd learned from the previous application that having another person in the room changed the quality of the conversation in ways she couldn't prove and didn't need to prove because she'd felt them. Maria, 51, who had said, "I don't go back. Once they see me that way, they've seen me that way. I find somewhere else." Rachel had coded Maria's response as customer attrition due to negative branch experience. She understood now why Maria had said it the way she'd said it. Once they see me that way, they've seen me that way. Not the loan officer was biased. Not the system failed me. Just. Once someone has looked at you that way that had nothing to do with your credit score or your income or your business plan, you couldn't undo it. You couldn't go back into that branch and sit across from that person and be looked at neutrally. The look was permanent. The room was permanently that room. Rachel had built Lumina to change the look. She hadn't thought enough about the room. She was thinking about it now. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the Lumina intake flow, the process she'd designed, the questions, the sequence, the language, the specific choices she'd made about how a loan application could feel different from the one she'd just sat through. She read it with different eyes. Not the eyes of the person who'd built it, the eyes of the person who'd just been in those chairs. She found 7 places where the room could still happen. Not in the algorithm was clean. In the human touchpoints, the intake call, the document review conversation, the approval notification, the decline notification, especially the decline notification, which she'd written to be clear and kind, and which was, she understood it now, still a letter that arrived after someone had already paid the cost of hoping. 7 places where a person could still feel like Maria had felt. She opened a new document. She typed, "The algorithm is not the product. The experience is the product. Fix the room." Then she listed the 7 places. Then she sat back. She looked at the parking garage around her. Concrete. Fluorescent. The ambient noise of a structure that existed purely to hold cars between the places people actually wanted to be. She thought about David Cho. She'd been thinking about him in the specific, contained way. She thought about things she hadn't decided what to do with yet, circling them, not landing. He'd been professional. He'd been correct. He'd also turned to his colleague and said something that made his colleague smile while Rachel was sitting in the chair. She could report that. She had the recording, she had the timestamp. She had the documentation of a pattern because she'd done the same exercise at 3 other branches in 3 other cities in the past 2 months, had sent in women from her team, had collected the same data in different rooms. Meridian Bank had a pattern, not a policy, a culture, the specific invisible transmission of a way of seeing that happened not through training manuals, but through the moments between the official interactions, The turned chairs, the quiet comments, the smiles that weren't for the customer. She could take that to the investors. She was going to take it to the investors, but sitting in the parking garage, she understood something about what she wanted to do with it that was different from what she'd originally planned. She didn't want to use it to disqualify Meridian from the acquisition. She wanted to use it to change the acquisition terms. Not, we won't buy this bank because it has a culture problem, but we will buy this bank, and the culture problem is specifically what we're buying it to fix. And here is the data that tells us what fixing it actually requires. Not diversity training, not compliance workshops, not a policy document, a different room. She'd been building the different room for 3 years in the Lumina platform. She knew what it required. She just learned, this morning, what it felt like to need it. She closed the laptop. She sat for one more minute. She thought about Soon Yi Kim walking into the fourth bank, knowing exactly what she was walking into. Walking in anyway. The cost of walking in was less than the cost of the place not existing. Rachel started the car. She had one more bank to visit. The third bank was different. Not in the way Rachel had hoped, not better. Different in a way that took her longer to name because it required a category she hadn't built into her research framework. The loan officer's name was Patricia Webb, 50-something. The kind of woman who had been doing this job long enough that the warmth was real rather than calibrated. You could tell because it didn't turn off between sentences. She'd looked at Rachel's documentation the same way David Cho had looked at it. She'd seen the same things. She'd reached the same conclusion. But the room had been different. Patricia had said, I want to be straight with you about what I'm seeing here, because I think you deserve a straight answer rather than a polished one. She'd explained the gap, the income threshold, what was missing and specifically what would close it, not as a list of requirements, as a map. Here is where you are. Here is where you need to be. Here is the distance between them, and here are the roads. She'd said, this isn't a no forever. It's a not yet with a specific path. She'd given Rachel her direct line, not the branch number. Her direct line, written on a card in her own handwriting because the printed cards had the main number. Rachel had sat across from Patricia Webb for 22 minutes and had not felt the cost that she'd felt in the other two rooms. Not because the outcome was different, because the room was different. She'd sat in the car afterward for a long time, not to rest this time, to understand the difference. She'd interviewed Patricia Webb's customers without knowing they were. Patricia Webb's customers had interviewed women who'd been declined at this branch and had still described the experience as one they'd go back to. She'd coded that as anomalous positive sentiment despite negative outcome and had flagged it for follow-up and had not followed up because the data point hadn't fit the framework she was building. It fit now. The framework had been wrong. Not wrong, incomplete. She'd been measuring outcome satisfaction. She should have been measuring room satisfaction separately from outcome satisfaction because they were different variables that moved independently. You could have a good room and a bad outcome. You could have a bad room and a good outcome. The second one was worse than the first. She opened the notebook. She wrote for 11 minutes without stopping, not organized notes. The specific, unfiltered writing of someone capturing something before the structure of thinking about it made it smaller than it was. When she stopped, she had 3 pages. She looked at them. At the top of the first page she'd written, without planning to, Patricia Webb knows something. Find out what it is and build it in. She looked at that line. Then she turned to a clean page. She wrote, what does the room need to do? Below it, she listed what Patricia's room had done. Told the truth without cruelty. Gave a map, not a verdict. Made the path visible. Treated the application as the beginning of something rather than the conclusion of something. Left the door open in a way that felt real rather than procedural. She looked at the list. She thought about Lumina's decline notifications. The language she'd spent 3 weeks writing, careful, clear, kind. Designed to not feel like a door slamming. It still felt like a door. Because a decline notification arrived after the room, after the process, after the person had already been through everything. It was the last thing, and last things carried the weight of everything that came before. Patricia Webb had built the last thing into the first thing. The not yet with a specific path had been said in minute 4 of a 22-minute conversation, not at the end, at the beginning of the middle, when there was still time for it to be a different kind of information rather than a conclusion. Rachel had been building the room from the outside in. She needed to build it from the inside out. She put the notebook away. She looked at Devon Avenue through the windshield. Her mother's salon was 2 blocks north. She could see the sign from here, Soon Yi Nails, the letters the specific red that Soon Yi had chosen, because red meant luck, and she'd decided she was done waiting for luck to find her and was going to put it on the sign instead. Rachel had been 8 when the sign went up. She'd stood on the sidewalk and looked at it and understood, without having words for it yet, that the sign meant the 4th time had worked. She took out her phone. She sent Sandra a message. "I have the data you asked for. And something else. Can we meet tomorrow?" Sandra replied in 4 minutes. "My office, 9 a.m. Bring both." Rachel put her phone away. She started the car. She drove north on Devon Avenue. She passed the salon. The lights were on inside. Her mother was in there somewhere, at her station, or at the front desk, or in the back making the tea she made at 3 o'clock every afternoon. Because 3 o'clock was when the afternoon needed something. Rachel didn't stop. She kept driving, but she looked. Sandra Lee's office had a view of the lake. Not the kind of view you noticed after a while, the kind you noticed every time. Because the lake was different every day, and Sandra had positioned her desk to face it deliberately, which Rachel had understood from the first meeting as a signal about how Sandra thought. She wasn't interested in the city behind her. She was interested in the thing that changed. Rachel sat across from her at 9:14. She'd been there since 8:50. Sandra had been there since 8. Neither of them had said anything about the other being early. Rachel put the notebook on the table. She put the recording device beside it. She put the 3-page analysis she'd typed at midnight beside that. Sandra looked at the 3 items. She didn't touch them yet. "Tell me first," she said, "before I read anything." Rachel told her. Not from the notebook, from memory, the first bank. The professional decline. Adequate is not the same as dignified. The drive to Devon Avenue. The second bank, David Cho, the 2 seconds. The sound of a smile she wasn't supposed to hear. Her hands stopping. She said that part plainly. "I froze," she said. "I knew what was happening. I'd read every paper written about this moment. I'd interviewed 400 women who described this moment, and I froze." Sandra looked at her, not with surprise, with the specific, careful attention of someone who had been waiting for this part. "How long?" Sandra said. "Until he turned back," Rachel said. "Maybe 30 seconds. What did it feel like?" Sandra said. Rachel looked at the lake. "Like being subtracted," she said. "Not attacked. Not dismissed. Subtracted. Like the version of me that had walked in, the version with the company and the data and the 3 years of work, had been quietly removed from the room and replaced with a different version. A version that the room had already decided about." Sandra was quiet. "Being subtracted," she said. "Yes," Rachel said. "That's going in the pitch deck," Sandra said. Rachel looked at her. "The investor presentation," Sandra said. "Page 3, right after the market size slide." She picked up the notebook. "May I?" Rachel nodded. Sandra read. She read the way she read everything, completely, without skimming, moving through each page with the focused attention of someone who understood that the thing she was looking for might be in any sentence and she wasn't going to miss it by moving too fast. She turned pages. She stopped at the 7 places Rachel had identified in the Lumina intake flow. She read them twice. She put the notebook down. She picked up the 3-page analysis. She read that too. When she finished, she put it down and looked at the lake for a moment. "Patricia Webb," she said. "Yes," Rachel said. "You went back and talked to her?" "Yesterday afternoon," Rachel said, "after I sent you the message." Sandra looked at her. "You went back to the branch," she said. "I needed to understand what she was doing differently," Rachel said. "Not observe it. Understand it." So I went back and I told her I was doing research on lending experiences, and I asked if she'd talk to me. And she did, Sandra said. For 40 minutes, Rachel said, on her lunch break. Sandra looked at the notebook. What did she say? Rachel thought about the conversation, about Patricia Webb sitting across from her in a sandwich shop on Devon Avenue, eating half a turkey sandwich and talking about her job with the specific, unpretentious candor of someone who had been doing something long enough to know what it actually was. She said the job was never about the money, Rachel said. It's about the decision. And the decision was always about the person, not the application. The application was just the documentation of the person. She paused. She said, I'm not approving a file, I'm approving a future. And if I can't see the future from where I'm sitting, the problem is usually my position, not their file. Sandra looked at the lake. I'm not approving a file, I'm approving a future. Yes, Rachel said. How long has she been at that branch? Sandra said. 14 years, Rachel said. And the branch's approval rate for small business loans in the surrounding demographic, Sandra said, compared to the other Meridian branches. 23% higher, Rachel said. I pulled the HMDA data last night. Sandra looked at her. You pulled Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data at midnight, she said. Small business loan proxies, Rachel said. It's not a perfect data set, but it's directional. 23% higher, Sandra said. Yes, Rachel said. One loan officer, Sandra said. 14 years. 23% higher approval rate for the same demographic that David Cho's branch is declining at a rate that, she picked up the 3-page analysis, you've estimated at 31% above the national average for this income bracket. Estimated, Rachel said. I'd want a full audit to confirm. Which is exactly what we're going to ask for, Sandra said. As a condition of the acquisition. Rachel looked at her. You're still proceeding with Meridian, she said. Yes, Sandra said. Because of what you found, not in spite of it. Rachel looked at the lake. She'd assumed, had been assuming since Devon Avenue, that what she'd found would kill the deal. That the data on David Cho's branch, on the pattern across branches, would make Meridian unacquirable. Walk me through it, she said. Sandra put down the analysis. We've been looking at Meridian as a distribution network, she said. Branches, infrastructure, customer base. That's the standard acquisition thesis. She paused. What you found changes the thesis. You've identified a culture problem that is specific, documented, and correctable. You've also identified in Patricia Webb proof that the correction is possible within the existing structure. One data point, Rachel said. One data point, with 14 years of evidence, as Sandra said. That's not an anomaly, that's a model. She picked up the notebook. You said you found 7 places in the Lumina intake flow where the room could still happen. Yes, Rachel said. If we acquire Meridian, Sandra said, those 7 places become 247 branches, and Patricia Webb becomes the training protocol. Rachel looked at the notebook, at the 7 places. At the algorithm is not the product. The experience is the product. You'd use the acquisition to restructure the culture, she said. We'd use the acquisition to install the room, Sandra said. Your room. The one you've been building for 3 years. She looked at Rachel. The platform was always the plan. The branches are the scale. Rachel was quiet. She looked at the lake, at the thing that changed every day. She thought about David Cho, about the 2 seconds and the smile she wasn't supposed to hear and her hands stopping. She thought about what happened to a culture when the people who had been optimized for the old version of it were no longer in a system that rewarded what they'd been optimized for. The restructuring, she said, the training protocol change, the culture shift. Some people won't make that transition. No, Sandra said. They won't. That's not nothing, Rachel said. No, Sandra said. It's not. They sat with that for a moment, not minimizing it, not resolving it into something cleaner than it was. The women who left those branches, Rachel said, who didn't go back, like Maria. Yes, Sandra said. They're not coming back because the sign changes, Rachel said. They're not coming back because the training protocol changes. Trust doesn't work that way. No, Sandra said, it doesn't. So what are we actually fixing? Rachel said. Sandra looked at her. The next Maria, she said. We're not fixing what happened to the ones who already left. We're fixing the room so the next person who sits in it doesn't have to become Maria to survive it. Rachel looked at the notebook. It made the path visible. It treated the application as the beginning of something rather than the conclusion of something. Patricia Webb knows something. Find out what it is and build it in. She'd found it. Now she had to build it in. Not just in Lumina. In 247 branches. She picked up her pen. I need to go back to the 7 places, she said. With Patricia Webb's framework. I want to rebuild each one. How long? Sandra said. 2 weeks, Rachel said. If I work nights. Sandra looked at her. You have a 17-year-old, she said. Jason can manage 2 weeks of late dinners, Rachel said. He's been managing more than that for a long time. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Rachel, she said. Yes, Rachel said. The thing you described in David Cho's branch, Sandra said. Being subtracted? Yes, Rachel said. Does Jason know you felt that? Sandra said. Rachel looked at the lake. At the thing that changed every day. No, she said. Tell him, Sandra said. Not because he needs to know. Because you need to say it to someone who isn't going to put it in a pitch deck. Rachel looked at her. Sandra picked up the recording device. May I keep this? She said. For the due diligence file. Yes, Rachel said. She picked up the notebook. She stood up. Sandra, she said. Yes, Sandra said. The acquisition, Rachel said. When it closes. Patricia Webb. What about her? She needs to be in the room when we design the training protocol, Rachel said. Not consulted. In the room. Her name on the document. Sandra looked at her. Done, she said. Rachel picked up her bag. She went to the door. She stopped. She turned around. Sandra. Yes, Sandra said. Thank you, Rachel said, for asking the question. Sandra looked at the lake. Your mother went back a 4th time, she said. You just went back 3. Rachel looked at her. I know, she said. I'm still learning. She went out. She told him at dinner. Not planned. She'd planned to wait. Had told herself she'd find the right moment. The right framing. The version of it that was composed enough to share. She'd been composing things for Jason his whole life. Finding the version that was true and also manageable, that gave him what he needed to know without making him carry what wasn't his to carry. She'd been doing that since he was 4. She was tired of it. Not tired of protecting him. Tired of the gap between what she said and what was actually happening. The specific accumulated weight of a woman who had been managing her own experience into something presentable. For so long she'd started to lose track of what the unmanaged version felt like. Sandra had said, tell him. She was telling him. He was 17. He was eating pasta she'd made from a jar because the 2 weeks of late dinners had started tonight and she'd gotten home at 8 and jar pasta was what 8 o'clock looked like. He didn't complain about the jar pasta. He never complained about the jar pasta. That was its own kind of thing she tried not to think about too often. I did something this week, she said. For work. I want to tell you about it. He looked up. Not with the performed attention of a teenager pretending to listen. With the real kind, the specific quality of attention he'd given her since he was small, the look that meant he understood something was about to be said, that mattered, and he was going to be present for it. She told him. Not the business version, the real version. The jacket from 2009, the recording app, the notebook, the 2 banks, and what had been the same about them and what had been different. Patricia Webb and the turkey sandwich, and I'm not approving a file, I'm approving a future. And David Cho. The 2 seconds, the sound of a smile she wasn't supposed to hear, her hands stopping. She said that part the same way she'd said it to Sandra, plainly, without the management of it. I froze, she said. I've spent 3 years building something to prevent that moment, and I froze in it. Jason was quiet. He was looking at his pasta. She waited. How long did you freeze for? He said. 30 seconds, she said. Maybe less. He nodded. Still looking at the pasta. That's not a long time, he said. It felt long, she said. I know, he said, but you kept going. She looked at him. You sat back down after and asked your questions, he said. From the notebook. 2 of the 3, she said. I couldn't get to the 3rd. 2 out of 3, he said. After that, she looked at her son. At 17 years old, doing the thing he'd always done, not minimizing, not performing comfort, just locating the true thing in what she'd said and handing it back to her. Jason, she said. Yeah, he said. I don't tell you enough, she said. What things actually feel like. I give you the managed version. He looked up. I know, he said. You know, she said. Mom, he said. I've been watching you manage things my whole life. He looked at her steadily. I know what it looks like when you're giving me the version. That's okay for me to hear. She looked at him. Does that bother you? She said. He thought about it, honestly. She could see him thinking about it honestly, rather than reaching for the answer that would reassure her. Sometimes, he said. Not because I need to know everything. Because sometimes when you manage it, I can feel the gap between what you're saying and what's actually there, and I don't know what to do with the gap. She looked at the gap, the specific, familiar shape of it, the space between I'm fine and what was actually true, between it's handled and what handling it had cost, between the version she offered and the version that existed. She'd been living in that gap for 13 years. I froze in a bank branch on Devon Avenue, she said, in front of a man who laughed at me with his colleague while I was sitting right there. And I couldn't make myself look up for 30 seconds, and I couldn't make myself ask the third question, and I drove to the parking garage afterward, and I sat in the car for 6 minutes, and I thought about Halmoni. He looked up. Grandma, he said. Yes, she said. I thought about her going back the fourth time, knowing what she was walking into, going back anyway. She looked at her hands. And I thought about how I've spent 3 years building something so she wouldn't have had to. And I was sitting in the parking garage, understanding that I still don't fully know what it cost her to go back. I know it academically. I know it as data. But what it cost her in that moment, I got 30 seconds of it, and I had to sit in a parking garage for 6 minutes. Jason was quiet. She went back 4 times, he said. Yes, Rachel said. Without a parking garage, he said. Rachel looked at him. At 17 years old, understanding something in one sentence that she'd been circling for 6 minutes in a parking garage on Devon Avenue. Without a parking garage, she said. She just kept going, he said. Yes, she said. He picked up his fork. He ate some pasta. She ate some pasta. The kitchen was quiet in the specific way it was quiet when something had been said that didn't need anything added to it. Mom, he said. Yes, she said. The company you're building, he said. The thing you're trying to fix. Yes, she said. Is it going to work? He said. She thought about Patricia Webb, about I'm approving a future, about 247 branches and 7 places in the intake flow, and the room she was going to rebuild from the inside out, about the next Maria. For some people, she said, not all of them, not the ones who already left, but the next ones, yes. I think it's going to work for the next ones. He nodded. That's enough, he said. She looked at him. Is it? She said. He looked at her steadily. Grandma didn't fix the whole system, he said. She opened a nail salon. That was enough for her to do. You're doing your part. She looked at her son. The specific clear-eyed pragmatism of a person who had grown up watching someone do hard things and had absorbed, without being taught, the understanding that hard things were done in parts and that doing your part was what was asked of you, and that asking for more than that from yourself was its own kind of vanity. She had not taught him that. He had learned it from watching. She thought about what he'd been watching, about the managed version and the gap, and what it was like to grow up feeling the gap without having a name for it. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her. You were protecting me, he said. Yes, she said. I know, he said. But I'm... Yes, she said. You are. He ate more pasta. She ate more pasta. At some point, she got up and made tea because 3 o'clock was long past, and this felt like a tea moment regardless of the hour. She put a cup in front of him. He looked at it. You make tea like Halmoni, he said. I learned from her, Rachel said. I know, he said. That's what I mean. She sat back down. She held the cup. She thought about Soon Yi Kim making tea at 3 o'clock in the salon, the specific ritual of it, the same time every day, the way it marked the afternoon as something that had a shape. She thought about what got passed down. Not the things you tried to teach, the things you did without knowing someone was watching. Jason had been watching. He'd learned the T. He'd learned the part about doing your part. She hadn't known he'd learned those things. She was glad she knew now. Jason, she said. Yeah, thank you, she said, for listening. He looked at her. You're my mom, he said. That's what I'm here for. She looked at her son. At 17 years old, saying the true thing plainly without decoration. The same way he'd been doing it his whole life. She hadn't managed that into him. He'd just always been like that. The meeting was on a Wednesday. 14th floor of a building on Wacker Drive. The kind of conference room that had been designed to communicate something, floor-to-ceiling glass, the city visible on three sides, a table long enough that the people at the far end were technically in a different conversation from the people at the near end. Rachel had been in rooms like this before. She'd been the person presenting in rooms like this before. Today, she was presenting data about a room that looked exactly like this one. She set up at 8:47. Sandra was already there, at the near end, the end closest to the door, which Rachel had learned was where Sandra always sat, because Sandra liked to be able to leave quickly if the meeting stopped being useful. The Meridian team came in at 9. 6 people. Legal, finance, operations, 2 people whose titles Rachel hadn't been given in advance and who she assessed in the first 30 seconds as risk and culture, the functions that showed up when an acquiring party had concerns they hadn't fully named yet. David Cho was not in the room. Rachel had known he wouldn't be. This was executive level, not branch level. But she'd checked the attendee list twice. She'd been checking for his name for 4 days. Not because she wanted him there, because she'd been thinking about what she would do if he was. She'd decided nothing different. The decision had taken 4 days. The Meridian CEO was a woman named Catherine Park. 60s. The specific, contained authority of someone who had been running things long enough that authority had become ambient rather than performed. You felt it without being able to point to what produced it. She'd looked at Rachel when she came in. Not the assessing look of someone deciding. The look of someone who had already decided and was now simply confirming. Rachel had looked back. Neither of them had said anything extra. The meeting started. Sandra ran the first 20 minutes, acquisition structure, timeline, the financial framework that made the deal make sense from both sides. Rachel had heard it 3 times and listened as though she hadn't, because the way Catherine Park listened to it told her things. Catherine Park listened like someone who already knew the numbers and was waiting for the thing underneath the numbers. At 9:23, Sandra said, Rachel is going to present something we're calling the room analysis. It came out of Lumina's customer research, and I want to be upfront that it's going to be uncomfortable in specific ways. Rachel. Rachel stood up. She didn't use slides. She'd considered slides, had built them, had looked at them at 11 o'clock the night before, and understood that slides would let the room process what she was saying as data before they felt it as something that had happened to a person. She wanted them to feel it first. 3 weeks ago, she said, I walked into a Meridian branch on Devon Avenue in Chicago. I was applying for a small business loan for $8,000. I was dressed the way my customers dress. I had documentation that matched what my customers bring. I had a credit score of 694. She paused. The branch manager reviewed my application and declined it. The decline was correct. The documentation didn't meet the threshold for the product I'd requested. That part isn't what I'm here to talk about. She looked at the room, at 6 people who had arrived prepared for one conversation and were now inside a different one. At some point during the application, the branch manager turned to his colleague and said something I couldn't hear. The colleague smiled. I was sitting directly across from them when this happened. She stopped. She let it be still. I've spent 3 years interviewing women who've described this moment, she said. I've coded it as environmental friction. I've built algorithms to reduce it. I've written about it in academic language that makes it sound like a variable. She paused. I want to tell you what it actually is, she told them. Not with data, first without data. The way Sandra had asked her to tell it in Sandra's office. The way she'd told it to Jason over jar pasta at 8 o'clock, being subtracted. The hand stopping, the 30 seconds, the parking garage, the 6 minutes. The way she'd written about herself in the third person in her notebook, because the third person was the only way to make it into something she could work with. Subject froze. Emotional cost of continued presence in the room exceeded available resources. She said that out loud. The room was very quiet. Catherine Park was looking at the table. Not disengaged, the opposite. The look of someone receiving something carefully. That's the room, Rachel said. That's what the room costs the people who sit in it. Not all the time, not in every branch, but in enough branches, often enough, that it shows up in your data, whether or not you've been looking for it. She picked up the folder. She put the HMDA analysis on the table. She walked them through it. Approval rates by branch, by demographic, by loan officer tenure. The specific documented pattern of a system that was not uniformly discriminatory, that had Patricia Webb's and David Cho's and everything in between, but that had never measured the difference between them or asked why it existed or built a structure that rewarded one and corrected the other. She put the 7 places on the table. The places in Lumina's own intake flow where the room could still happen. She put Patricia Webb's framework on the table. I'm not approving a file. I'm approving a future. She put the 14 years and the 23% on the table. Then she stopped. She looked at Catherine Park. I'm not here to tell you your bank is racist, Rachel said. I'm here to tell you your bank has a room problem. And room problems are culture problems. And culture problems are leadership problems. She paused. And leadership problems are solvable if the people at the top decide they're worth solving. Catherine Park looked at her. How long have you had this data? She said. The branch visit was 3 weeks ago, Rachel said. The HMDA analysis I completed 4 days ago. The 7 places in the Lumina intake flow I identified the night of the branch visit. You found problems in your own product, Catherine said. Yes, Rachel said. And you're presenting them to us. Catherine said. Rachel said. Why? Catherine said. Rachel looked at her. Because the acquisition only makes sense if we're honest about what we're both bringing into it, she said. You have 240 branches and 30 years of customer relationships. I have a platform and a framework and data on what the room is doing to the people in it. She paused. Neither of those is sufficient alone. Together they might be. Catherine looked at the HMDA analysis, at the 7 places, at Patricia Webb's framework, at the 14 years and the 23%. Patricia Webb, she said. Yes, Rachel said. She's been at that branch 14 years, Catherine said. We've never asked her why her numbers look like that. I know, Rachel said. Catherine looked at her. The look of someone who had just understood something about her own organization that she hadn't known she didn't know. Rachel recognized the look. She'd worn it in a parking garage on Devon Avenue. What do you need from us? Catherine said. 3 things, Rachel said. Tell me, Catherine said. A full audit of approval rates by branch and loan officer across the portfolio, Rachel said. Independent third party. Results shared with us before close. Catherine nodded. Patricia Webb in the room when we designed the training protocol, Rachel said. Not consulted. In the room. Her name on the document. Catherine nodded again. And a commitment, Rachel said. Not in the acquisition agreement. Those are legal documents, and legal documents are about liability, not intention. She looked at Catherine directly. A commitment from you, personally, that the culture change is the point of this acquisition and not a side effect of it. That when the numbers get hard, and they will get hard, the room stays on the agenda. The room was quiet. Sandra was looking at the lake through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Catherine Park looked at Rachel for a long moment. Then she said, I walked into a bank branch in 1987 to apply for a loan for my first restaurant. I had a business plan. I had savings. I had a cosigner. She paused. The loan officer asked me if my husband had reviewed the plan. She paused again. I didn't have a husband. Rachel looked at her. I left, Catherine said. I didn't go back to that branch. I found a different bank. She looked at the HMDA analysis. I've been running a bank for 16 years, and I have never once asked whether my branches are doing to other women what that branch did to me. The room was quiet. The audit, Catherine said. You'll have it. Patricia Webb, Catherine said. She'll be in the room. She looked at Rachel. And you have my commitment, she said. Not as a legal document. As a person who walked out of a branch in 1987 and has been meaning to go back ever since. Rachel looked at her. At the woman who had been subtracted 37 years ago and had built a bank and had not yet turned around to look at whether her bank was doing the same thing. Not because she was bad, because nobody had asked. Thank you, Rachel said. Thank you, Catherine said, for coming back. Rachel looked at her. At the specific weight of those two words in that order, for coming back, she thought about Soon Yi Kim, about the fourth time, about what it cost, about the salon that had been open for 23 years because someone had gone back. That's what we do, Rachel said. She sat down. Sandra was still looking at the lake. She didn't turn around. But Rachel saw her shoulders change, the specific small release of someone who had been holding something and had just set it down. The audit took 6 weeks. Not because it was complicated, because it was thorough. Rachel had specified independent third party, and Catherine Park had chosen a firm that neither of them had worked with before, which was the right call. For the same reason that Patricia Webb's branch numbers meant more, because they hadn't been managed. Unmanaged data told the truth. The truth was what Rachel had estimated, and worse in 3 branches, and better than expected in 4, and exactly what the HMDA proxies had predicted in the remaining 240. David Cho's branch was in the first category. She'd read that part of the report twice, not because she needed to, because she needed to sit with the difference between, I knew this, and here it is documented and signed by an independent third party, the specific, different weight of something confirmed versus something suspected. She'd spent 3 weeks building the training protocol, not alone, with Patricia Webb, who had driven to Chicago on 2 Saturdays, and had sat in Rachel's kitchen with tea and had talked about her 14 years, the way you talked about something you'd been doing so long. You'd stopped knowing what was remarkable about it and needed someone else to tell you. I just ask people what they're building, Patricia had said. Not what they need the money for. What they're building. Because what they need the money for is in the file. What they're building is why they're in the room. Rachel had written that down. It became paragraph 2 of the training protocol. Patricia had read the draft on the second Saturday. She'd made 7 changes. Not suggested, made. Had picked up Rachel's pen and written directly on the document in the specific, unself-conscious way of someone who had been asked into a room and understood that being asked meant being there fully. Rachel had kept all 7 changes. The protocol had Patricia's handwriting in the margins. That was going to stay. The acquisition closed on a Thursday in March. Not with a ceremony. Catherine Park had said no ceremony. For the same reason, Rachel had said no ceremony for Riverside Commons groundbreaking in a different story, in a different city. Ceremonies were for people who needed to announce things. This was for the people who needed the thing. Rachel had been in the closing meeting at 7 in the morning. She'd been at a Meridian branch in Pilsen at 9:30. Not the Devon Avenue branch. A different one, the one with the lowest approval rate in the portfolio, the one the audit had flagged most specifically, the one where the room problem was most documented and most entrenched. She'd gone in not as Rachel Kim CEO, as Rachel Kim small business loan applicant. Same jacket, same documentation, same recording app, different branch. She'd sat across from a loan officer named Marcus, 26, first year. The specific combination of eagerness and uncertainty, of someone who hadn't yet learned what the culture of the room was supposed to be, because the culture of the room was changing on the day he'd started. He'd looked at her documentation. He'd looked at her. He'd said, "Tell me what you're building." Not because the training protocol had told him to say it. The protocol had been distributed that morning. He hadn't had time to read it. Because Catherine Park had said it in the all-hands meeting at 8 a.m. before the branches opened. Tell them what they're building, not what they need the money for. What they're building. She'd attributed it to Patricia Webb, by name. Rachel had watched the recording of the all hands from the car in the parking lot before she went in. She'd watched Catherine Park say Patricia Webb's name in front of 2,000 employees. Patricia Webb, who had been at her branch on Devon Avenue for 14 years, whose name had never appeared in any company communication before today. Marcus had asked Rachel what she was building. She'd told him. The same story she'd told David Cho, the nail chair on Lawrence, the space she wanted to rent, the client base she'd built. He'd listened differently from David Cho. Not better trained differently. Present differently. The way Patricia Webb was present. The way you were present when someone had told you the job was about what people were building and you'd decided to believe them. He'd told her the documentation didn't meet the threshold. He'd told her why specifically, without jargon, the map not the verdict. He'd told her what would close the gap. He'd given her his direct line, not the branch number. His number. She'd thanked him. She'd walked out. In the elevator, she'd looked at her hands. They hadn't stopped. Not because the room had been perfect. Because the room had been different. Different enough. She went to the salon after. Not planned. She'd been driving north on Kedzie and had kept going past that turn for the highway and had understood by the second block that she was going to Devon Avenue. She parked in front. Soon Yi Nails. The red letters her mother had chosen because red meant luck, and she'd decided she was done waiting for luck to find her. She went in. Her mother was at her station. She looked up when Rachel came in. She didn't say anything for a moment, the specific, reading silence of a woman who had known her daughter for 44 years and could tell from the way she walked through a door what kind of thing had happened. Sit, she said. Rachel sat in the client chair. Her mother took her hands. She started to work. Not a full manicure, just the hands. The specific, practiced attention of someone who had been taking care of other people's hands for 23 years and understood that hands held what people carried and that sometimes taking care of the hands was taking care of the person. How did it go? She said. Better, Rachel said. Not perfect. Better is how it goes, Sun Yi said. Perfect is how you know you're not paying attention. Rachel looked at her mother's hands working. At the hands that had filled out a loan application 4 times. At the hands that had arranged a station every morning for 23 years. At the hands that had made tea at 3 o'clock, because 3 o'clock was when the afternoon needed something. Mom, she said. Yes, Sun Yi said. I found her, Rachel said. The loan officer, the one who said yes the 4th time. Sun Yi kept working. Patricia, Rachel said. Her name was Patricia. She's been at that branch 26 years. She drove to Chicago twice on her Saturdays to help me write the training protocol. Sun Yi was quiet. She has your handwriting, Rachel said. Sun Yi looked up. What do you mean? She said. She writes on things, Rachel said. She picks up the pen and writes on the document directly. She doesn't suggest. She just writes. Sun Yi looked at her daughter. Something crossed her face. Not sentiment, recognition. I want to meet her, she said. I'll arrange it, Rachel said. Sun Yi went back to the hands. Rachel sat in the chair. The salon around them, the specific warm ambient noise of a place that existed because someone had gone back a 4th time. The other stations, the other clients, the conversations happening in English and Korean, and the mix of both that Devon Avenue had been producing for 30 years. Rachel, her mother said. Yes, Rachel said. The man who laughed, she said, David. Rachel looked at her. You never told me what happened to him, Sun Yi said. He lost his job, Rachel said. Not because of me specifically. Because the audit showed a pattern, and the pattern required restructuring, and the restructuring removed the people who had been optimized for the system that was being replaced. Optimized, Sun Yi said. He wasn't malicious, Rachel said. He was trained. The training was wrong. Sun Yi was quiet for a moment. Do you believe that? She said. Rachel looked at her hands, at the hands that had stopped for 30 seconds in a branch on Devon Avenue. Yes, she said. I believe it, and I also believe the woman who was sitting in the chair doesn't have to care whether he was malicious or trained. The cost to her was the same either way. Yes, Soon Yi said. That's right. She kept working. Rachel sat. Outside, Devon Avenue was doing what it did, continuously, regardless of acquisitions and training protocols and audit reports. The shops, the people, the specific ongoing life of a neighborhood that existed whether or not the financial system acknowledged it. It had existed when Soon Yi walked past it in 1996. It existed now. Mom, Rachel said. Thank you, Rachel said, for going back the fourth time. Soon Yi looked at her daughter. You would have done the same, she said. Rachel thought about the parking garage. About 6 minutes. About she just kept going. Without a parking garage. I don't know, she said. I had 6 minutes in a parking garage and I almost didn't. Soon Yi looked at her. Almost, she said. Yes, Rachel said. Almost doesn't count, Soon Yi said. You went back in. She finished the hands. She held them for a moment before she let go. Rachel looked at her hands. Clean. Still. Ready. 6 weeks after the acquisition closed, Rachel got a call from a woman named Elena. $6. Home cleaning business. 3 clients wanted 12. The algorithm had approved her in 4 minutes, not because the bar was lower, because the bar was right. Elena had called to say thank you, not to Lumina. To whoever had decided that 6 years of consistent client payments counted more than the absence of a traditional credit history. Rachel had taken the call herself. She listened to Elena describe the intake process, the document review, the approval notification. Nobody laughed, Elena said. Not as the main point, as an aside. The way you mentioned something that shouldn't be remarkable and was. Rachel looked at the photograph of her mother on her desk. Soon Yi outside the salon in 1998, looking at the vacant storefront, seeing what wasn't there yet. Are you the one who built it? Elena said. Rachel thought about Patricia Webb driving to Chicago on 2 Saturdays. About Patricia's handwriting in the margins. About Catherine Park saying Patricia's name in front of 2,000 people. About Soon Yi going back the 4th time. About Jason eating pasta and saying she just kept going, without a parking garage. A lot of people built it, Rachel said. I just knew what it needed to fix. Tell them thank you, Elena said. I will, Rachel said. She hung up. She looked at the photograph. At the red letters her mother had chosen because she'd decided she was done waiting for luck to find her. She picked up her phone. She called Patricia Webb. My mother wants to meet you, she said. A pause. When? Patricia said. Whenever you're free, Rachel said. Saturday, Patricia said. I'll bring lunch. Rachel looked at the photograph. She makes tea at 3, she said. Every day. She'll have it ready. Subscribe if you're new, share this with someone who's been in that room, and tell me in the comments, when did you go back in? I read everyone. See you in the next story.